For as long as Daniel could remember, mornings felt like punishment. Welcome to a story a day. Subscribe the channel, thanks. The alarm would scream at 6 a.m., sharp and unforgiving. And Daniel would lie there staring at the ceiling, his chest already heavy. Not tired. He was always tired, but miserable. In a deeper way he couldn't explain. The kind of misery that seeped into bones. That made getting out of bed feel like lifting a mountain with bare hands. He was 38. Lived alone in a small apartment with peeling paint and a broken kitchen light. And worked a job he once called temporary. That temporary job had lasted 11 years. Every morning followed the same script. Shower without feeling the water. Coffee without tasting it. Traffic without noticing the sky. His life moved, but he didn't feel present inside it. People thought Daniel was fine. He showed up on time. Paid his bills. Smiled when required. But inside, something had been slowly shutting down. Dreams he once had, writing, traveling, building something meaningful, had been quietly buried under routine and fear. He told himself he was being realistic, responsible, mature. But the truth was simpler and sadder. He had given up. On this particular morning, the weight felt worse than usual. He sat on the edge of the bed longer than normal, elbows on his knees, head down. The silence of the room pressed against him. His phone buzzed with notifications he didn't want to read. Emails. Reminders. More noise demanding pieces of him. Is this it? He whispered, surprising himself. He hadn't planned to say it out loud, but the question hung in the air, unanswered. Is this all my life is going to be? Waking up miserable? Counting hours? Waiting for weekends that disappear too fast? At work, the hours dragged. His computer screen glowed while his mind drifted. He watched coworkers talk about promotions, vacations, future plans. Daniel nodded along. But envy burned quietly in his chest, not because he wanted what they had, but because they seemed to want something. During lunch, he sat alone in his car, staring at the steering wheel. His reflection in the windshield startled him. Tired eyes. Slouched shoulders. A man who looked older than his years. He remembered being 25. Full of energy, telling himself, I'll change things next year. That next year had repeated itself until time stopped asking. By the time evening arrived, Daniel felt hollow. He returned to his apartment, dropped his keys on the counter, and collapsed onto the couch. The TV played in the background, but he wasn't watching. Then his phone rang. It was an unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. That decision would cost him 5 minutes. Daniel stared at his phone as it vibrated in his hand. The unknown number pulsed on the screen, insistent, almost impatient. He had learned to ignore things that demanded his attention. Calls, feelings, hope. They usually led nowhere. But tonight, something was different. He swiped to answer. Hello. His voice sounded thinner than he expected. There was a brief pause on the other end, then a calm, familiar voice said, Daniel? It's Mark. The name hit him like a memory long unopened. Mark, his college roommate. The one who used to talk about big ideas late into the night. The one who left the city years ago to figure things out. Mark. Daniel sat up straighter. Wow, it's been a long time. Too long, Mark replied, a soft smile audible in his tone. I won't take much of your time. I just needed 5 minutes. Daniel almost laughed. 5 minutes felt harmless. What could possibly change in 5 minutes? They exchanged quick updates. Mark asked how Daniel was doing. Daniel gave the automatic answer. You know. Busy. Same old stuff. There was another pause, this one heavier. Can I be honest with you? Mark asked. Daniel hesitated, then nodded, forgetting Mark couldn't see him. Sure. I almost didn't call, Mark said, because the last time I saw you, you were miserable, and I was scared you still might be. The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Mark continued, I was exactly where you are now, waking up hating mornings, living on autopilot, telling myself I'd change someday. He exhaled. Then one night, I asked myself a question I couldn't escape. Daniel leaned forward, gripping the phone. What would my life look like if I stopped betraying myself? The sentence landed hard. Daniel felt something shift in his chest, like a locked door rattling. Mark went on. I realized I was more afraid of failing than I was of staying miserable. And that scared me more than anything. Daniel swallowed. His throat felt tight. Memories rushed in, unfinished notebooks, abandoned plans, excuses layered over regret. I didn't fix my whole life, Mark said gently. I just fixed one decision. One small promise I kept to myself the next morning. Daniel closed his eyes. The noise of the TV faded. All he could hear was his own breathing. What promise? He asked. Mark smiled through the phone. To stop ignoring the voice that says, "This isn't the life you wanted." Silence filled the line. 5 minutes had almost passed. Before hanging up, Mark added, "You don't need a new life, Daniel. You need one honest moment." The call ended. Daniel stared at the dark screen of his phone, heart pounding. Nothing around him had changed. The apartment, the couch, the silence. But inside him, something had cracked open. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't dread the morning. He was afraid of it. And strangely, that felt like hope. Daniel barely slept that night. Not because of noise or stress, but because his mind refused to return to its usual numb silence. Mark's words echoed over and over, circling like unfinished business. What would my life look like if I stopped betraying myself? When the alarm rang at 6 a.m., Daniel reached out to turn it off, then froze. This was the moment he usually ran from. Snooze. Delay. Forget. But today felt different, heavier, like a test he hadn't studied for but somehow knew the answer to. He sat up. The room looked the same cracked wall, same cluttered chair, same grey light slipping through the curtains. But Daniel noticed it all more clearly, as if his eyes had finally adjusted after years in the dark. In the bathroom mirror, his reflection stared back at him. He didn't look inspired. He didn't look confident. He looked tired and scared. But beneath that fear was something unfamiliar. Honesty. "I don't know how to fix this," he whispered to himself. "But I know I can't keep lying." That was it. No grand plan. No dramatic vow. Just one honest sentence. At work, Daniel did something small but terrifying. He didn't open his email right away. Instead, he pulled out a notebook he'd carried for years but never used. The first page was blank, intimidating in its purity. His hand trembled as he wrote a single question at the top. What do I actually want? He stared at it for a long time. The old habit of dismissing the question tried to return. Be realistic. You're too late. This is pointless. But he didn't close the notebook. He wrote slowly, clumsily. Not dreams, just truths. I hate how invisible I feel. I miss creating things. I'm afraid I wasted my life. Each sentence felt like tearing something loose from inside him. Painful, but relieving. During lunch, instead of hiding in his car, Daniel walked outside. The air was cold, sharp, real. He noticed how the sun reflected off glass buildings. How people laughed without looking at their phones. Life was happening, messy and imperfect, and he was standing in it. That evening, back in his apartment, Daniel made a decision that scared him more than staying miserable. He opened his old laptop and searched for the writing folder he hadn't touched in over a decade. Dozens of half-finished ideas stared back at him like ghosts. He opened one. The words weren't good. They were awkward and raw, but they were alive. Daniel typed for 15 minutes, then 20. When he finally stopped, his heart was racing. Not with fear, but with something close to joy. For years, misery had been his routine. That day, he learned something important. The opposite of misery wasn't happiness. It was courage. The next few days were harder than Daniel expected. He had assumed that once he started, once he felt that small spark of courage, everything would move forward naturally. Instead, resistance arrived, quiet, clever, and relentless. Each morning, the alarm still felt heavy. Doubt whispered the moment his eyes opened. Yesterday was just a mood. This won't last. The old voice was back, trying to protect him from disappointment by pulling him into familiar misery. At work, nothing had changed. The same emails, the same meetings, the same polite conversations that skimmed the surface of real life. And now, awareness made it worse. Daniel could no longer pretend he was fine. Knowing he wanted more made staying feel painful. One afternoon, his manager stopped by his desk. "Everything okay, Daniel? You've seemed distracted lately." Daniel forced a smile. "Yeah, just thinking." The truth sat heavy on his tongue. "I'm thinking about leaving. I'm thinking about risking everything." But he wasn't ready to say it out loud. Not yet. That night, Daniel came home exhausted, not from work, but from fighting himself. The notebook lay on the table, unopened. The laptop stayed closed. Fear crept in, wearing the mask of logic. What's the point? You're too old to start over. People like you don't get second chances. He paced the room, heart tight, palms sweaty. This was the moment where most of his past attempts had died, right here, in the space between intention and action. He picked up his phone, thumb hovering over Mark's name. Then he stopped. "No," he said aloud. "This one's on me." Daniel sat down, not to write, but to listen. To the discomfort. To the ache of wanting something he was scared to claim. For the first time, he didn't try to escape the feeling. Minutes passed. Then something shifted. He realized the fear wasn't telling him to stop. It was asking him to prove he was serious. Daniel opened the notebook and wrote one line. "If I don't choose myself now, I never will." That night, he didn't write pages. He wrote one paragraph. It was messy, imperfect, but it was honest. The next morning, he sent an email he had been avoiding for years to a small online writing group he once admired. His finger hovered over send for a long time before he finally clicked it. The fear didn't disappear, but neither did he. Days turned into a week. Then 2. Small actions stacked quietly on top of each other. Writing in the mornings, walking during lunch, saying no to overtime that drained him. No one applauded. No miracle happened. But something deeper was forming. Daniel wasn't waiting to be saved anymore. He was practicing staying. Months passed quietly. Not the kind of months that announce themselves with dramatic changes or loud victories, but the kind that reshape a life from the inside. Daniel still woke up early, still went to work, still lived in the same apartment. From the outside, almost nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. Mornings no longer felt like punishment. They felt neutral, and sometimes, unexpectedly, hopeful. Daniel had learned that happiness wasn't something you woke up with. It was something you practiced. He kept writing. Some days only a paragraph. Some days nothing at all. But he never quit. The writing group became a steady presence. People who didn't need him to be impressive, only honest. Slowly, his voice grew stronger, clearer. One evening, Daniel sat at his desk and reread the first page he had written months ago. The fear was still there on the page, but so was the courage. He smiled, not because the writing was perfect, but because it proved something important. He had stayed. At work, he finally asked for a conversation he'd been avoiding. Not to quit dramatically, but to change direction. Fewer hours. More space. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't guaranteed, but it was real. For the first time, his life wasn't built entirely around surviving. On a quiet Sunday morning, Daniel called Mark. "I think I get it now," Daniel said. "Get what?" Mark asked. "That 5 minutes didn't change my life," Daniel replied. "It just reminded me that my life was still mine." Mark laughed softly. "That's all it ever does." After the call, Daniel stepped outside. The city was awake, messy, loud, alive. He walked without rushing, breathing in the air, noticing the simple miracle of being present. He thought about the man he used to be, the one who woke up miserable for years, waiting for the right moment to live. That man wasn't weak. He was just afraid. And fear, Daniel had learned, doesn't disappear when you're brave. It disappears when you act anyway. That night, Daniel wrote one final sentence in his notebook. The same notebook that once terrified him with its blank pages. 5 minutes didn't save me. Choosing myself every day did. Somewhere out there, another phone was ringing. Another person was sitting on the edge of a bed, wondering if this was all life had to offer. Daniel hoped they'd answer, because sometimes all it takes is 5 minutes, not to change your life, but to remember you're allowed to. Thanks. Watch this story. Subscribe. A story a day. Thanks.